Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests in this next interview. Now, Polish President Andrzej Duda has called on the United States to deploy nuclear weapons in Poland as a deterrent against potential Russian aggression. This proposal has sparked internal debate, with Prime Minister Donald Tusk advocating for a more discreet approach to such sensitive matters. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss NATO's nuclear deterrence and the implications of nuclear sharing program for Poland and the eastern flank countries is Jan Ruzicka, a lecturer in security studies at Aberystwyth University. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation.
So, of course, President Duda's call for nuclear deterrence comes in the heels of the Russian aggression. But can you help us understand how that's going to strengthen NATO's nuclear deterrence, or perhaps France is a better alternative when it comes to nuclear sharing?
Well, I think when it comes to nuclear sharing, one thing to realize is that NATO has always been what's known as a nuclear alliance. And so there has always been an element of nuclear sharing. It's currently borne by some countries, and none of the countries that joined NATO after 1989 actually hosts any of these weapons at the moment. The idea is basically quite simple. At some point, a conflict with Russia might escalate to the nuclear level, and that would require possibly use of nuclear weapons from Europe. And even countries that do not own these weapons would then share the burden. This is, of course, designed to never reach that level. And the belief is that possessing and having this readiness will dissuade the opponent, in this case, Russia, from ever attacking NATO.
Right. Now, most recent development have the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance reacting to President Duda's call, and he said that he would be very surprised if the U.S. actually agreed to this nuclear sharing plan. Do you think that pretty much at this point the possibility of U.S. sharing its nuke with Poland is off the table?
I'm not surprised that Vice President Vance would say this. We've all heard him in the last 2 months say all sorts of things that would suggest that this is his line. He is not very favorably disposed to the U.S. engagement in European defense. One also needs to realize that this program of burden sharing is not simple. I mean, it requires facilities, it requires delivery vehicles, planes in this case. And so this is something that is obviously not imminent, but it could be done if there is willingness. Of course, that is the key question in today's climate and given the US posture recently.
Right. Political willingness is a key here. When it comes to politics as well, can you help us understand a little bit about Poland's differing views within Polish leadership? As Prime Minister Tusk is telling, President Duda basically to be a little bit more discreet when it comes to these nuclear sharing topics. And the defense minister has also came out and said that this should be discussed in a NATO context instead of the president trying to pursue a bilateral relationship.
Well, I suspect, this is part of a political struggle internally in Poland. As far as I'm aware, Prime Minister Tusk basically also was more inclined perhaps to explore the French option. So I suspect this is part of political fighting in Poland. In general, one would probably want to go quite discreetly about this. This is not deploying a few tanks here or there. This is creating potentially a significant deployment with positive and negative consequences for the country. So I would imagine that it's for Poland to work this out, and it is probably better to work this out more carefully rather than doing it through newspapers, as President Duda did by announcing it in an interview with the Financial Times.
Right, and speaking of internal struggles, we also know that, like we mentioned earlier, J.D. Vance have even a stronger isolationist kind of view towards foreign policy compared to Donald Trump. So perhaps the option could still be on the table, or do you think that at least when it comes to nuclear sharing, Trump and Vance is aligned within its view with foreign policy?
I don't know. I mean, and we've all seen the great unpredictability in President Trump's statements, but I would imagine that this is nothing that would be decided imminently. I mean, we've heard Donald Trump float all sorts of ideas about moving the U.S. Troops from Germany to Hungary. But once again, one needs to remember that these are significant infrastructural projects. I suspect that is one of the reasons why Poland, and certainly some people in Poland, would welcome this, because the infrastructural investment then carries with it a presence that is hardly going to be short term.
Right. And how has Russia responded to Poland's proposal? What do you think this would have as an implication for NATO-Russia relations?
Oh, I'm sure the Russians would denounce it. And here I think it's important to say that President Duda was quite right. When Russians move their nuclear weapons and do things with them, including to Belarus, they don't ask anybody yet. When anyone else is considering other moves, they are always shouting about feeling threatened. Now, that may well be right that they are feeling threatened, but I think one, A, ought to take those statements with a pinch of salt, and two, perhaps they might be considered within the framework of Russian aggression over the last decade, well, more than a decade. And so Russia will not like this, but that's possibly just one of many considerations as this decision would be taken. But it will be taken within NATO, and I don't think it is imminent.
Right, like you said, Russia might not like this, but that's kind of the point, right? Well, President Duda also mentioned NATO borders kind of moving east in 1999. Therefore, NATO's infrastructure should also shift east. Do you think this perspective aligns with NATO's current strategic posturing?
Well, I mean, we have seen NATO moving eastwards, slowly perhaps, and much slower than some or many of the countries in Central Europe and on the eastern flank would like. But things have been moving eastwards, and there is some logic to that. So I would expect that this will continue to be happening, because really the only significant threat in Europe at the moment when it comes to security is Russian aggression.
Right. And I would also like to go back to what you mentioned about infrastructure a bit earlier, because, well, also wondering how would the integration of nuclear weapon into Poland's defense infrastructure impact its military strategy, and does it change operational strategy and planning?
Well, I mean, it would. Just to make this clear, right? Even if there is an element of nuclear sharing, these weapons will not be controlled by Poland, and so these weapons would be stationed, and in particular case of a conflict that might reach nuclear escalation, they would be delivered by the Polish Air Force, but the decision would still not be Polish. So Poland might think that this, and I'm sure some people in Poland do, that this will enhance Poland's security, but in terms of operations, this would not be a Polish decision as to when these weapons might be used, which is also one of the common arguments against the sharing, that you are creating a target and you don't have quite the final say in terms of use. I think and this is not American issue, President Macron was also clear that even if the French nuclear umbrella opens above Europe, it will, at the end of the day, be the French president who will call the final decision.
Right, like I mentioned, the French president will be calling the final decision, and I'm drawing to Emmanuel Macron's proposal to extend France's nuclear protection to European allies. How viable do you think that is for, at least for Poland in particular?
I mean, it's an option that is being explored. I think it would require an expansion of both the French nuclear arsenal, so there would need to be a greater number of warheads. And it would require extension of capacity. So once again, I mean, we're not talking probably about anything imminent, unless you would directly station French jets in Poland with this capability, for example. But I don't think that this is anything that is really imminent.
All right. Thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us dissect this, well, explosive conversation. Thank you so much for being with us on TVP World.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.